So, uh, welcome, Michael de Paolo. Can you kind of introduce yourself and tell the audience what you do?
Oh, well, as you said, I'm Michael Paola, currently just the founder of Freshwalks, having recently exited my agency life of 20 plus years. I'm the father of three boys. I think it's important to kind of talk about the person, not just the business. And I live in Stockport, just outside Manchester. I'm a Manchester boy originally. And we're on a mission, really, to help business take their dealings and their wheelings outside, and we do that with a view to hopefully creating happier, healthier workforces and stronger, more productive working relationships. So that's the kind of the mission. The vision is, I might have shared with you before, we want to walk to the moon. So I tot up every single step that we take, and we're currently 125 million steps on the way to the moon, which is roughly a quarter way there, based on my rough calculations. And the good news is there's plenty of people on the journey. Been doing this thing now for 7-8 years, all in now, hoping to build something, hoping to create a legacy. Might make a few pennies, probably not.
Yeah, we can live in hope on that one. But yeah, so what drove you? What was it? You know, did you just wake up one day with the epiphany of, oh, I'm going to start
Well,
walking to the hills?
I'm definitely not. I had a conversation a couple of days ago with somebody actually who was telling me how outdoorsy they've always been, and how they had a similar idea a number of years ago. And I've kind of almost been looking at envy at what we're doing with Freshwalks. I'm kind of the exact opposite of that. I was definitely never naturally outdoorsy. I don't know. I suppose growing up in Wiltshire, I don't ever recall being taken out to the Peak District as a kid. It just wasn't something I did. But I've always been invested in the notion of community and bringing people together, and that does go back to my teens, organising stuff at school, bringing people together, whether it was pool tournaments or football tournaments or whatever that might have been. Through to business, when I'd always organise networking events, and I take pleasure in bringing people together. I take pleasure in seeing those connections thrive and become friendships or fruitful business partnerships. So the idea of Freshwalks came around in 2014. Wasn't my own idea. I always hold my hands up on that. I don't like to take credit for things I shouldn't be doing so. And a chap we both know, Michael Taylor, who at the time was he was a chairman of Downtown Manchester in business, as well as a number of other sort of portfolio roles. And he suggested this concept, this idea of taking a bunch of business owners, probably out for a day, walking in the hills, and ending in a nice pub at the end with a drink and maybe pie and chips. And so the loose idea for the day, the original format, was almost definitely not my concept. But I said, I'll do that, because I think Michael at the time was about to embark on his own political career. He ran to be Labour MP down in Hazel Grove, near where I am now. So I said, well, I'll do that. It sounded like fun. It was something I hadn't done. So I did it. Reached out to people around me. We scrambled together. I think 38 people said they come in, 26 turned up, and that's always still the way, that kind of percentage attritional dropout rate. But we got a great gang together, met for some breakfast at Piccadilly train station, jumped on the train. Everyone was giddy. It felt like a school trip. And we landed in Glossop, where another friend of mine, Tom Hetherington, again, have to give him credit for being part of the, I suppose, the initial founding crew. Tom had put his hand in the air and said, I'll lead a walk, I'll take us up a hill. And he pointed at a pub in Glossop. So he kind of gave me so Michael kind of had the idea, Tom had the framework and the know-how to lead a walk. And I basically put a load of bums on seats, brought this gang to Glossop. I'll never forget heading up Lightside with Sam Jones alongside me. We'd both been out till, I think, 1-2 a.m. the night before, and I was quite frankly quite hungover, and I remember nearly dying. I was horribly unfit, mainly because my my Sunday league failing football career was all but over. I was starting to, I call it grow a bit of northern timber around the. Anyway, I was just blatantly unfit, and it really crystallised it for me that day. And halfway up, I thought, I need to turn back here. I can't do this. I did. Got the hill, got up top. The winds hit me, the oxygen coursing into my veins, and all of a sudden I felt great. And I turned around to Sam and said, "Bloody hell, mate, we should have stayed out later last night." So hung over, gone. Anyway, we're in the middle of the moors. We're having this great day, and I'm looking around, and what I'm seeing happening around me is entirely different to what I would see at a networking event in a bar or a hotel or a boardroom. We've spoken about the science before around it, but I think the first thing I observed was the complete removal of distraction straight away was creating a different type of conversation, a different type of openness and dialogue.
Yeah.
No mobile phone. Well, you couldn't get a signal, so there was no choice on that. And apart from the odd photograph, technology was firmly away. I think there's also something about the disconnection from the rat race of the city. And if you go back to 2014, it had been quite a hard few years. I think many of us had. I mean, certainly my own business at the time, we were having some troubles. You know, in our journey of 20 years, they were the toughest times, just post-recession. People have been working harder for less. And I think there was a time when actually that was solved through drinking. And it was in my case, there was a massive businessy drinking party culture in the years preceding. But I think all of a sudden, and this is years before the pandemic, there was suddenly a realization that we needed to embrace well-being and not paying lip service to it. So I talk a language of businesses now that walk the walk and workplace well-being, not talking about it, because I think a lot of people they fall into the trap of just talking about it. I call it the fruit bowl and reception. We'll train somebody to be a mental health first aider, job done. We're a caring him without actually looking at the root causes, and the preventative solutions. So anyway, I digress. But back to 2014, I observed that I think the world of work was changing. I think the younger generation coming through, maybe not drinking as much anyway, but also realization from an older generation that there has to be a better way to relieve the stresses and the strains of running a business. It's a lonely place running a business. And when times are tough, you might not have somebody to turn to in your circle of friends or your other half at home. So it creates friction. So if you basically take a bunch of these people and put them into the hills in the middle of nowhere and say, right, you lot, bang your head together, talk, what happens is people just start to share things they wouldn't do if they were in a bar with a glass of wine, where there's a veneer and there's barriers and there's boundaries. So I won't dwell on that point too much longer right now, because we might come back into all that science and what actually happens when you're out walking and talking. But a few hours later, we're back in the wheat sheaf in Old Glossop, and I cast my eyes around the room, and the smiles on the faces were authentic. They were real. They weren't the plastic, "How are you?" Forced smile. "I'm okay. I'm all right, thank you." There was just this genuine buzz around the pub, and I was tuning into some of the conversations, and people were making big decisions. Well, I remember one woman on the, she was going to dump her fella that weekend. Somebody was going to start a new business. All these things, these realizations were happening in front of my eyes. And it was because people are just giving themselves a chance to check out and let the brain just find the gears that it can't ordinarily do. And those realizations come about through some self-realization, maybe some headspace. I always try and find 20 minutes, half an hour for myself on a walk. But it also just comes through sometimes through that dialogue and just bouncing an idea off somebody and just sharing a problem. Because guess what? In a group of 25, 30 other people, there's a very high chance that somebody else in that group is facing the very precise challenge that, or has done in the past, that you're facing right now. So it was a no-brainer. We kind of sat there, everyone's loving it. I remember sitting down. It was a great moment because it was forecast to rain all day, which I'd really feared back then, and it didn't. It held off. And as soon as we sat down for the drinks in the pub, the heavens opened outside. I remember looking outside; it was raining outside. I mean, imagine if it had rained that day, none of this would have ever happened. It would never have happened. But anyway, it didn't rain. And I did get up the hill. I just threw out there, look, we're doing this again, because I think the original intention was for a one-off. You know, in my head, it was a free thing. I just did it. And around that table, it was yeah. A few beers in, yeah. None of those yeahs have probably ever been back. But we did a follow-up 2 months later. It was nowhere near as well attended, but we were approaching the colder months. But I think it was quite clear we're onto something. I think that was absolutely confirmed and compounded in late February 2015. I didn't have the balls basically to run the walks over that first winter, because we had none of the things we now have in place we had in place, and we were just winging it and taking people. And I always just say we weren't lost, we just didn't know where we were going. The end of February walk, I think word had got around Manchester that there's this thing that Michael Paola's running this netwalking thing, and so we had 55 people sign up, and I can't quite recall. I think it was in the high 40s turned up. We went back up Bleatlow, and it was just carnage. It was absolute carnage. I mean, I learned quite a bit that day, more than you could probably learn in any training course in group management and communication and managing expectations. All these things now that we kind of do as part of the customer journey. A lot of those lessons were actually forged and crystallized in the last 2-3 hours of that walk that day. But what that showed me that day was, it was another superb day with a great crowd and a bit of a sing-song in the pub late on that evening, as I recall. And that gave me the belief that, well, this needs to be a monthly event. And then that was it, really. I think that was the seminal event that, from the May of that year, then it was a monthly event, a similar format for, maybe a couple of years. But it was fascinating. And I think the benefit of hindsight, looking back at it, gives you even more insight into, I suppose, the human behavior and the dynamics of what goes on. And you talk, Martin, don't you, about the flow state and the endorphins and all these things, I think, come together. Some of the other big things I think that play a part in the success of the format, which I don't think, obviously people run these events now all over, and just the very basic notion of walking and talking. I think a couple of big things of this is that if you're having a meeting with somebody in an office or in a boardroom, there's quite often some kind of barrier. Usually that's a table, and so that's a barrier. Then the next barrier is a hierarchical barrier, and it's usually a meeting where most meetings usually involve two people, and it's usually a senior and a junior person, or there's some kind of dynamic, a customer supply relationship where basically one owns the power. Yeah. So in that dynamic, and I think both parties feel that. So when you take that into a walk and talk conversation up a hill, all of a sudden the hierarchy in the job title is gone. The ability to get up the hill becomes a dominant factor. There's no barrier between the people that represents a physical barrier that translates to feelings of anxiety or insecurity. All that goes. And what's left is the hills for me. I refer to them as a leveler. They're a real leveler because they kind of bring people back down to earth. You're just two human beings, and that's then what happens. And actually, the people who turn up who don't behave like that and start to play, maybe like all the Billy Big Bollocks, they don't thrive in that environment. They get chewed up and spat out because there's no room for it.
Yeah.
And then the final thing on that point is that when you walk in and talk side by side with somebody, you've got this benefit of not having to make eye contact, which I think for a lot of people, the science will say there's a part of your brain that is thinking about that when you first meet somebody. And typically when we first meet, a networking event, 7:30 in the morning, you've gone in for a business breakfast, networking thing, you're running late, you've been up all night with the kids, and you turn up, your heart's racing, and you run into this room, it's busy, you don't know anybody. It's a very stress-heavy scenario. You see somebody you do know, and then they introduce you to 5 people. You won't remember any of those names because the brain is working overtime about everything else that's going on. That's the reason you don't remember the names. But then you get into a conversation, and then you're having to make eye contact with people. And when you're making eye contact, there's a part of your brain that's saying to you, it's on there on your shoulder, and it's saying, how are you standing? What are you doing? What are you going to say next? It's this like thing that's just gnawing away at you. and a lot of it stems from eye contact. And if you're walking along, that bit of the brain switches off. You don't have to think about that, because that bit of the brain is engaged in something else. It's engaged with where you put your foot. It's engaged with, oh, there's a rock there, and so that that part of the brain gets occupied by that.
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
and the conversations happen. So anyway, that's it. I mean, I've been speaking more about the actual the depth of the product rather than actually Freshwalks, but I find it fascinating. I think I still continue to kind of observe people on walks, and I watch from afar the difference between maybe some of the internal colleague and team events we do, the dynamics that happen on those events, and then the external client relationship events, and it's always fascinating watching human behaviors. And I think one final thing I'm saying is that there's, to some extent, there's almost no hiding place in the hills because of the conditions that I've described before. It creates the perfect environment and breeding ground for authenticity.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, you're going to get found out. You're not going to be able to bullshit for too long, because it lends itself to a depth of conversation. I've been to networking events when I've walked up and I've seen somebody who I thought, oh, I've read their press, I think they're full of shit. I'll go and speak to them. Hello, 2 questions later, and you try and dig, and they're off. And because they know they've been found out, and simple question, and whereas it's very difficult when you're in our environment. You've got to be who you are, and I think there's something really positive about that.
It was interesting when I was at the Better Business Summit, and I was explaining to someone about Freshwalks and the idea of the fact that you're walking side by side, and she said, oh, that'd be really good for my son who suffers from ADHD. He doesn't like eye contact. And I was kind of saying, well, when they train you as a therapist, or like hypnotherapy, in my case, training to be a hypnotherapist, they say, put people at 45 degrees. You don't want them opposite each other.
Yeah.
Kind of put them at 45 degrees. And I've been in situations where retreats where they've done that thing where they say, stare into people's eyes and stuff. And I was like, being ex-military,
it's quite confrontational though, isn't it? That's the thing. That there's almost a passive aggressive thing around that. It's a similar thing to handshakes, isn't it? The overly firm handshake, this sort of the toxic masculinity side of that thing that you'd see over years. I think it's come out now, but there was a time where the strength of your handshake was kind of this hidden body language metaphor or whatever for how powerful
domination,
I am.
wasn't it?
Yeah,
dominance behavior.
And so again, I the pandemic got in the way, but I do like a permissive hug if I can. I try and do something. Am I okay to hug you? And I think it's just it creates a deeper emotional connection with somebody. It's not always appropriate, obviously. But.
Yeah. So it's certainly a powerful thing about community, because we collaborated our way to the top of the tree, didn't we? The evolutionary tree, I always say. Even Einstein needed someone to talk to before he came up with his ideas of, theory of relativity and stuff. What do you think's going to happen in the future? Where do you think it's going to go?
Freshwalks or just
Freshwalks and the idea of building communities. I think it's really, it's really important, isn't it, that we develop solutions to the kind of challenges that all businesses and society face from building communities.
Well, I think on a obviously I'm not, this is a completely off the cuff conversation, but I think on a macro level, I think rebuilding sense of communities is now more important than it's probably ever been. But I think if you probably drew a graph of sense of community, like in neighborhoods and everything over time, throughout history, would it be fair to say that we're probably at an all-time low in terms of how we interact with our neighbors? How many people do you speak to live in a road and they don't even know the names of the person who lives maybe 2 doors along, 3 across? We've lost that. And you only have to go back 50, 60, 70 years to the old council estates, the inner city slums in Manchester and well, everywhere. Sorry, I'm pulling out from my own backstory that, and everybody would know everybody's business, and you wouldn't shit in your own doorstep. And these were, the old sense of community, the old rules. I think have largely been lost, and then if you compound that with how many people can truly rely on the state now for support. So when times are hard and times are tough, So I would imagine hundreds of thousands of years ago, community would pull you through. So I did a lot of family history research last year, and I discovered that who was it? It was someone like my great grandfather's, my bis nonno actually on the Italian side, is his auntie or uncle or something. They basically they were orphaned in the village in Italy in Castelforte where they came from. So they were only 8, and they lost their mum and dad, and the villagers brought them up as a collective.
Right.
Is the story. I don't know anything more than that. And that's how I see the old world. A sense of community, people looking out for each other and pulling them back up. And then I don't know, potentially maybe we created a sense of, with some of maybe the post-war stuff and some of the great stuff that was done, NHS and the benefit system, we've created a great sense of reliance on the state. But then what happens if the state changes? And that's potentially what's happened in the last, certainly since austerity, that all of a sudden you can't rely on the state to pull you up anymore. So if you're in the, I mean, somebody's posted in our community group this morning looking for help of this type. So if we've sacrificed the community support and help and that notion of looking out for one another, and we rely on, and then that rug gets pulled, then where are we left? So I've gone off on a mad tangent there, but I think it kind of sets the conditions for why now, when you create scenarios, so Freshwalks is a community. When you build that, then people actually, what's the word? I don't want to blow my own trumpet too much, but they embrace it. They just embrace it. They crave it. And there's a lot of other factors. I mean, it doesn't have to be down to that extreme that I talked about. Somebody who's in, maybe they're facing poverty or living. There's a whole gamut of in-betweens. And the in-between for me is probably this, actually. That I think the changing in working patterns and behaviours over the last 15, 20 years, and this was happening before the pandemic, it just merely accelerated it. So an example would be, there must be a high percentage of people in this country now working working remotely and just working on their own or working a portfolio life, but basically not in the traditional working for a big business, 9 till 5 at a desk, 40 hours a week, and then they switch on. We're all working in different ways, and but I think undeniably that shift in working behaviours has created an increased sense of isolation, disconnection from other grown-up adults. So I think a lot of people, especially those who do work alone, not work in offices, but I think they need that community. They need that sense of belonging to something, which traditionally an office environment would have given you, and that you look at a Christmas party, for example, these are the seminal things. And so I think when you work on your own, you don't have that. So I think you started the question about what the future of community, and so my view would be that it's going to become increasingly important. And I think people on a grassroots level are going to have to work harder and harder to build communities that work for the people within them, for a variety of reasons, because ultimately in life, we can only really rely on ourselves. And so we can create connections with other people and we can look out for each other, then that's a great thing. And
should we go on to the training bit? Taking your training outdoors.
Yeah, learning, coaching. And of course, this is a new thing for us, a relatively new thing. And but the principles and the basics aren't too far away, are they? From what we've seen in some of the. So I'll introduce the concept, the Walkshops concept that we've been delivering successfully throughout 2022, and again, it's interesting to watch and observe, because I think the stuff we've done together, obviously, you've been mainly delivering, and I've been watching, and again, as somebody who, I think over the years has sat and fought to stay asleep throughout a number of presentations and training modules and full-day events. And actually, the single biggest thing is I think the human brain isn't wired actually to sit and tune in and stay alert for we've all got slightly different bandwidths, but I think we all probably have tolerances that certainly don't extend to sitting there in a room looking at a screen for a full day, listening and consuming multiple messages. And I think that, you look around those rooms and there's people sat there. They're not listening, so they're just scribbling notes all day, writing notes, and you're wondering what their depth of understanding is. They might have actually recorded all the words, but I don't think they're really understanding. Then you've got people who are clearly just switching off and looking out a window if there is a window. Anyway, so Walkshops, to introduce what we've been doing, and there's kind of been two faces to it. I'm going to talk about the walk and talk methodology, which is fundamentally delivering content on a theme or a topic that hopefully meets the needs and challenges an organization's facing. So an example of that, we've delivered some content on topics like resilience, like well-being and purpose, delivered on the move across a walk, not to maybe dominate the walk, not to prevent people from still having the social interaction benefit, but to sprinkle some thoughts across the day and maybe encourage some gentle and light interaction, and to stimulate some conversation around, like I say, the theme of the day. So I think what we've seen is that, again, you take away those distractions and you get the oxygen pumping, the legs pumping, and get them outdoors, phones away. I think you've kind of got people there, haven't you? You've kind of you've got them engaged, and I think the brain's in a good state. Is kind of it's warmed up, isn't it? It's ready to go, and it's ready to absorb and to, I think creatively as well. I think that's a big thing. I think the brain can find those other gears that maybe get suppressed when you're at a desk or working from home and you're on a treadmill fighting an email inbox. But in between those fights and that treadmill, you're trying to get under the skin of a deep dive piece of work, and you can't concentrate. And it's the same with learning as well, I think. So again, going back to that indoor thing, somebody's learning, but there's a sneaky phone under the desk, and they're checking in on their emails, and they're not really in the room, and they're kind of absorbing. So we've done a few of these, and they've been well received. And I think the other delivery, the one that's also probably slightly more weatherproof, is what I've described as the hybrid delivery, where we will deliver a nice punchy morning session, maybe find a pub or a boathouse or a hotel if there's a bit more budget. Couple of hours in the morning, I think that's a great time. I think morning, everyone's naturally a bit, I mean, I'm actually an evening person, but I do acknowledge that I think the brain is in a better shape for learning in the morning. 2-3 hours, I think it's a nice amount of time. Keep it, get a very specific niche content. And then we usually get the pub to give us some packed lunches or something. We go off for a big hike in the afternoon, and there's usually something to talk about, and maybe there's some commitments people are going to make or some actions they want to commit to. So after a 10, 12, 13K afternoon walk, bring them back in, bit of a recap session, maybe holding a few people to account, asking them what they're going to do, what they're taking away from the day, and then it's time for a bit of food and some drinks. So it's a nice format that I suppose builds on our standard rambles and hikes format, adds a little bit more of a tangible commercial benefit, something that people can go back with and maybe implement into their business, whether it's some thinking, actions, ideas. And there seems to be coming back and booking more of these things. So they must be working. Well, it's early days, and it's been great to work with, I suppose, enlightened businesses, forward-thinking, innovative businesses like Bruntwood, JD Sports, and Tyler Grange, in terms of delivering this format. And I think in 2023 it's going to be quite a big thing.
Yeah, and it's, I think really what I've observed is that you kind of get more bang for your buck, because you not only you're not spending all day in front of a PowerPoint, you do a punchy experiential session in the morning, but then you've also got the added benefit that when you do something as a group that's different outside the office, you're building cohesion amongst the team, and that
Yeah,
will increase the
that's it.
learning as well.
So obviously we run the team rambles and hikes, and they're great, and they serve a purpose, and whether that's an internal event or a client relationship event, it's all around cohesion, and to use your word there, it's all about improving relationships, and there's a real organic, natural way people say to me, oh, are we going to stand in a circle and introduce ourselves? Or there's no, oh, you're going to do this or do it. You don't need to do anything. If you put people into the right environment, they will just invariably work the rest out for themselves. You just got to be cute with it and how you do it. And sometimes you do have to do little things on a walk, and you might have a group and it's always two guys at the front steaming ahead. Yeah. And because the pace they're going, they're breaking up the group and they're leaving two at the back who are chatting and taking Instagram photos.
The ones I've been on with you, it's women that are at the front.
Well, yeah.
We've got a couple of those.
There is. I think on the private internal anyway.
Yeah.
So then what happens is the same people talk to each other. So we let that happen. Then the two at the front chat all day, the two at the back chat all day, and the people in the middle are all. So you can't let that happen. You need to slow the pace, and you don't need to go the whole hog and say, right, you all need to speak to somebody different, but you just bring it back together, and these things tend to, by managing the pace. So there is a very subtle art to it, but fundamentally we let people just work it out themselves. So all that happens. But then with the Walkshops, these things still happen. I suppose all we're doing is just, like I say, wrapping around a bit more. And you said more bang for your buck, absolutely, because you're still going to get the social and team bonding aspects out of the day, but you may be going to give yourself a chance. And our sessions obviously can be whatever they need to be. I mean, we've got a whole bunch of specialist expert topics that we can almost deliver. If somebody said, can you do this next week, we can do it. But also I think what we're more interested in is really understanding what's happening at the moment in an organization, what are the challenges, what's the dynamic, what's the culture, and then building something that's going to kind of hit that on the, hit that head on and be absolutely right, because what's right for one business is invariably never going to be absolutely spot on for another business. And sometimes that can be just a very informal, relaxed coaching session where it's as much about us facilitating the group to take the time out in a structured way to talk through some of the challenges they're facing. Because I think when I was running the branding agency there, I used to sit down with the chief execs or the MDs, in our very early conversations and say, do you know what, the answers aren't in our heads, the answers are in your heads. What we're good at is getting it out of your head, aligning it all, and then polishing it, and then presenting it. That's what we did. The actual the secret of the brand was always it's their business, their vision. It's all in there. We weren't going to tell them, but what we had to be able to do was really to extract the good, the bad, and the ugly, and hopefully bin the bad and the ugly, take the good, polish it, align it, make sure everyone's on the same page. So it's no different with delivering a workshop and coaching. It's about identifying problems. Most of these people, they know their businesses better than we're ever going to know them. So sometimes it's just about giving people a structure and a framework and an environment to solve it themselves. And then they go away at the end of the day and go, all right, didn't think about that. But it's because, well, why would they? Because they're just busy. The rest of the time they're just in the office. They're in client delivery mode. We're all in it all the time, just getting back to customers, doing. And actually, one of the things that I think I genuinely failed at in 20 years of my agency, and I knew it. I kept telling myself I could never do it because I could never make myself my number one client. I couldn't do it. And the businesses that are really successful are really good at doing it. They're really utterly ruthless at making themselves their number one client. I didn't. I made my number one client my number one client, and I just looked after their needs more than my own. And that's great for them. But I think for the commercial benefit of your own business, because sometimes you've just got to get better at that bit. You've got to be ruthless when people say, "Oh, I can't do that thing next week because a client has." I'm thinking you've lost control of your of your diary there a bit. You're the leader of the business, and if you. So anyway, I'm rambling now into the other directions, but I think Walkshops are a great opportunity for teams to get out, enjoy some proper togetherness time, some real big fat shot of together gel, I might call it, but also to hopefully keep it tight, focusing on one thing and solve it in a morning, and just say, right, here's something that's not working. How can we get around it? And go, or they can just listen to some theories, some business theories and ideas, and hopefully put them into practice. But I think the point is, it's a very flexible format. It's a very flexible format, and obviously we're enjoying trying different things and seeing what works and building upon that as we go.
Very good. So how do people get hold of you then and book on the next one?
Well, luckily my name's not John Smith, so I'm usually quite easy to find across various social media platforms. So, well, if you go to the Freshwalks website, freshwalks.co.uk, there's a whole bunch of events on there. And it's probably worth me clarifying, and probably should have done that right at the beginning, that Freshwalks runs, it kind of has two faces. It runs a series of public networking style events. They're mainly Northwest based, although we do make the occasional trip further afield. They're open to everybody. It's invariably business people. When I say public, I just mean that anybody can buy a ticket. And I actively encourage people to come alone, because I think you get more out of it if you come alone. I think people who come in pairs tend to buddy up and not really engage and get into the community. But you can come alone, you could bring some colleagues, you can bring some clients, and you'll be warmly welcomed, and there's walks for all. So whether you want a challenging full day schlep across the moors, 30k, back to the pub with blisters on your feet, that's all in it together, middle of winter, we do that. But we also just do some gentle rambles around suburban parks. If it might be fitness, it might just be diary time, and actually, having a 2 to 3 hour stroll is more your jam. We also do that. We do sunset walks, we do sunrise walks, we do family walks, we do walks for women, we do gastro walks, we even do moonlight walks. So unless you don't like people are walking, I think there's probably a product for you somewhere in there. So that's the public, and then the rest of the business is the private, the corporate events that we do, the tailor-made stuff. Again, very typically either a business looking to get outdoors with their team for whatever purpose, team building, or I've had internal business development days. I'm speaking to somebody next week about they're having an internal sales conference and they want to wrap it up. So there's a load of different rationales, but there's the internal and then there's the client relationship days. It's the same. It's the same products, that we deliver. So yeah, and then within that, with the products within that, the broad products, the Rambles and Hikes, the Walkshops we discuss, I also run city walks and also deliver tours and retreats. And of course, you can organise a retreat and you can wrap in some workshops. You can walk. So there's really a thriving mass of products that we can deliver. We deliver either on a public ticketed event basis or privately for an organisation. And if it's on a private basis, it just needs to start with a conversation. And that conversation, I'll be asking questions about what you're looking to achieve, what's the objective. And sometimes it's a case of, well, let's start with something let's keep it simple, the initial thing. Let's just do something that people can understand, be able to get involved with, and then let's take it from there. So yeah, Freshwalks website, there'll be some contact page on there or something, or you can email michael@freshwalks.co.uk, and I will get back to you and hopefully organise a conversation about taking your business outside.
Brilliant. Cheers, Michael. Thanks for your time, man.